Chapter 3. The Black Forest. The trees stretched up into the sky, towering above Rav, Silva, Talus, and the group of 7 others that traveled with them. It had been decided that morning a smaller party would be sent out to scout the woods in search of new resources and for the sake of creating an updated map of the area. Rav had agreed to travel slightly ahead of the main group. Her shadow walking ability made it nearly impossible to detect her, only without sensing her mana, of course. She traveled swiftly between the darkest patches of trees and brush, keeping alert in case of hostile animals. Not sensing anything in the area, Rav picked up speed, quickly growing the distance between herself and the slow-moving party behind her. Clang, shink, clash! The sudden sound of metal thrashing together stopped Rav dead in her tracks. Her immediate instinct was to turn back to the group where a fight must have broken out, but quickly she realized the sounds weren't coming from the west, behind her, but to the northeast, ahead. The sound couldn't be mistaken for anything but the clashing of weapons. Rav, knowing better than to approach a battle alone, hurried back to the group to report her findings. Silva strode through the dimly lit forest. The air felt electric to her, and there was no escape from the feeling of being watched. 2 young humans and an older wildling walked with her, each carrying a leather satchel to hold herbs and other valuable items they might find. Silva's bag already carried strange glowing blue thistle she had found beside a pool of water, and her cowhide journal full of spells and the beginnings of the new map. "Look, Rav is headed this way," the older wildling said, pointing in front of them to a purple translucent figure which hastily darted from shadow to shadow in their direction. When she had reached them, Rav popped from the shadows, regaining her solidity. Rav looked around, realizing that 5 of them were missing. "Where's Talus and the others?" Rav inquired, hastily. She was short of breath. "They're just behind us, hold on," Silva replied in a serious tone. "Talus, hurry up, over here," she shouted. Only a moment later they saw the other 5 emerge from the brush behind them, all jogging to catch up. "What happened?" Talus asked. "There's fighting up ahead. I didn't get a look, but the sound was unmistakable," Rav said, finally catching her breath. "What do we do?" asked one of the others, a younger man with curly blonde hair. "We should take a look. We need to know if this is going to be a threat to us too," Silva insisted. "She's right," Talus agreed. "Rav, can you lead us there?" Silva asked. "Let's go," Rav replied, flicking her head in the direction of the battle. As they approached, the sounds of metal scraping together began to fill the air. Silva crept forward in a low crouch, keeping her eyes focused in front of her for any sign of battle, which now sounded as if it was just a few more paces ahead. Fwup! An arrow, fashioned of twisted wood and dirty feathers, whizzed through the air, striking a tree just behind Silva. They had found it, just beyond the next bush line. Talus flinched as an arrow zipped past Silva's head, lodging itself into a tree. Just before him, the brush blinded his view of the impending danger they faced. He continued forward silently, smoothly parting the foliage to reveal a clearing with a large stone tomb in the middle. Around the clearing, 4 men were fighting with 3 tree-like beasts. He had never seen anything like it before. The beasts clawed and bit at the 4 warriors with their bark-covered claws, knocking one to the ground, their worn bronze sword falling from hand. Suddenly, one of the young humans in their group sprung out of the bushes out into the open. Sword in hand, Tanner ran to the creature, who was now on top of the fallen warrior tearing into them. He plunged his broadsword into the neck of the thing, tearing sideways. Crunch. Crack. The beast's head tore off and hit the ground, rolling a few feet. Its body went limp, falling next to the warrior who had taken a hold of their sword once again. They staggered to their feet, turning to face Tanner, who suddenly jumped back, sword up when he saw what stood before him. The warrior met his gaze, its empty eye sockets piercing him. This fighter was not of the living, but of the dead, its thrashed armor revealing aged bone and rotten flesh instead of skin. The skeleton lunged forward at Tanner, who barely managed to snap out of shock to parry the swing of its sword. The bushes shook violently beside Talus as Silva burst out of them, dashing towards Tanner. It was no use. Thunk. Thwump. 2 arrows had hit Tanner's back. The undead archer who stood atop the tomb began knocking the next twisted arrow, but Talus reacted quickly this time. He strung together a series of rune words in quick succession, and the tips of his fingers, which were now pointed at the skeleton, buzzed with a white-hot energy. A bolt of lightning and fire exploded from his hand and crackled through the air. It made contact with the skeleton's neck, shattering its entire upper body into unrecoverable bits. Silva rushed over to Tanner, catching him under the arm as his body began to slump. Rav and Talus, who were the closest to Silva and Tanner, rushed out of cover, both drawing their weapons. Rav lashed her thorny whip at the nearest tree beast. It screamed out at her, thrashing its arm around in an attempt to break free from the hooked spikes that had dug into its mossy bark exterior. She pulled hard, tearing the thorns from its body, which ripped strips of its skin off, with them leaving the beast howling on the ground. Its glowing blue eyes seethed with unbridled hatred. Swiftly, Rav materialized a shadowy blade, which dripped and morphed as it dismembered the creature with ease. The others had joined the fight as well, taking down the remaining undead and the beasts, as Silva, now joined by Talus, dragged Tanner out away from the fighting. They laid him on his stomach as he groaned in pain from the arrows. He's losing blood. Quickly. I'll have to heal the wounds with the arrowheads inside. Silva pulled out a small knife and cut the cloth and leather away from the arrows, revealing the black, already decaying skin around each wound. Shit. These arrows have poison in them. I need herbs to fix this, she grimaced. No. This is magic, not poison, Talus objected. He had put a hand on one of the arrows, intending to break it off at the head, but there was mana flowing within it. Silva glanced up at Talus for a moment, giving him a concerned look. We have to remove the arrowheads, then, she trailed off, unsure what to do next. Please, don't let me die, Tanner pleaded, voice strained from pain and fear. We won't, Tanner. Please don't move so much. Silva reassured. She opened her bag and pulled out her notebook, flipping the pages until she found the spell she was looking for. Talus, can you pull the arrows out, she asked. Yeah, ready when you are, he responded, reluctantly grabbing each arrow. They paused for a moment, and then Talus gave a sharp tug, yanking the necrotic arrows from Tanner's decaying flesh. Not a moment later, Tanner let out a painfully loud scream and abruptly passed out. Silva held a hand over each wound, reciting a spell that would pause the decay and bleeding, as if stopping those specific parts of his body in time. Her hands glowed with a soft white as the spell finished. It was not a permanent solution, but with the little resources they had out in the hostile woods of Inglaive, it was the best option. Silva stood, finally breaking her focus from Tanner as she looked around at the aftermath of the fight. Bones were scattered around the clearing, as well as the corpses of wooden beasts. Some of the others were breaking apart the creatures and taking what seemed most valuable from each corpse. Binyar, Nolan, Hildur, Enister, Silva shouted, waving a hand for the four to come over. Can two of you carry him back while the other two keep guard? She asked. Think we'll run into any more of those things? Binyar questioned, giving her an unsure look. I don't know. You should be okay if you go back along the way we took to get here, she said. When you get back, could you please tell Bjorn and Eliza to head here? About a mile east of the wood's edge. Sure, I can tell them, Enister spoke up. He went to one knee and began to lift Tanner. Nolan scurried to the other side of Tanner and brought him up with Enister. Let's go, quickly, Enister commanded the others, who began to walk back with him.